In Richard Bancroft's world, everything has a price tag. Want a building permit fast-tracked? That's 50 grand. Need criminal charges to appear against a family refusing to sell their home? Pricier. But Bancroft's never met a problem money couldn't solve, until now. Because there's a new player in his perfectly corrupted game. One his money can't touch, his threats can't silence, and his army of lawyers can't intimidate. A 17-year-old girl who just filed papers to represent her family in the biggest fraud case the state's ever seen. His people are laughing. A teenager playing lawyer? With a second-hand suit and her dead grandfather's briefcase? But they don't understand what Bancroft sees when he looks at Simone Johnson's eyes across that courtroom. The same fire that made her grandfather a terror to corrupt officials 30 years ago. The same unflinching resolve that brought down 3 judges and 2 senators before cancer. Finally did what no amount of money or threats could do. Now William Johnson's granddaughter is standing in his courtroom, armed with nothing but truth, and her grandfather's old law books. And for the first time in his life, Richard Bancroft is about to learn what it feels like to face an opponent who can't be bought. Because some things don't have a price tag, justice is one of them.
Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. And if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss.
Dawn broke over Pine Grove, painting the modest home. Johnson family's 2-story house stood proudly among its neighbors, its well-tended garden a testament to Sarah Johnson's loving care. Inside, the gentle notes of amazing grace drifted through the morning air as Sarah's warm voice filled their home with its familiar comfort. Marcus Johnson's fingers traced the rim of his coffee mug as he sat at the kitchen table, his dark eyes fixed on the newspaper before him. The headline screamed in bold letters, "Local family faces arson charges in Bancroft warehouse fire. Millions in damages claimed." He'd read it a dozen times already, each word cutting deeper than the last. Sarah's voice caught slightly as she noticed her husband's expression, but she pressed on with her hymn, refusing to let fear silence her mourning. Ritual. The smell of bacon and eggs filled the kitchen, a futile attempt at normalcy in their increasingly chaotic lives. Upstairs, 17-year-old Simone Johnson sat at her desk, surrounded by towering stacks of legal books. Her grandfather's old, leather-bound volumes dominated the collection, their pages worn smooth by years of use. William Johnson's presence seemed to linger in every carefully annotated margin, in every underlined passage. She'd been up since 4, poring over statutes and precedents, searching for anything that might help her family. The sound of her mother's singing drew her downstairs, her notebook clutched tightly against her chest. Simone paused in the kitchen doorway, taking in the scene. Her father's shoulders were tense, her mother's movements just a bit too careful, signs of strain that had become all too familiar in recent weeks. "Morning, baby," Sarah called out, managing a smile as she placed a plate of eggs on the table. "You're up early again," Simone nodded, settling into her chair. "I've been reviewing Grandpa's notes on the Wilson case from '82. He defended a family against false accusations from a developer back then, too." She hesitated, then added, "Daddy, Mr. Patterson called last night." Marcus looked up sharply. "After I went to bed?" "Yes, sir." Simone opened her notebook, her handwriting neat and precise. "He's withdrawing from the case." The kitchen fell silent. Even Sarah's singing stopped, leaving only the quiet sizzle of bacon on the stove. Marcus's mug hit the table with more force than necessary, coffee sloshing over the rim. "He can't do that," Sarah whispered, turning from the stove. "The trial starts in 3 weeks. He can't just abandon us now." Simone flipped through her notes. "He said he received threats. He wouldn't give details, but he mentioned it would be better for everyone if he stepped away." Her voice remained steady, but her hands trembled slightly. "I've already called every law firm in the directory. No one will take the case." Marcus stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the linoleum floor. "Henderson and Associates? Won't touch it. Mitchell's Group? Too busy, supposedly. Bradford and Peters? Won't return my calls." Simone closed her notebook. "Everyone's afraid of Bancroft. They won't say it directly, but that's the reason." Sarah moved to stand behind her husband, placing her hands on his shoulders. The gesture was familiar. She'd been his anchor for 25 years of marriage, through every storm they'd weathered together. "What are we going to do?" Marcus covered her hand with his own. "We'll figure something out. We always do." "I could." "Do it," Simone said quietly. Her parents turned to look at her, confusion giving way to understanding as they processed her words. "No," Marcus said firmly. "Absolutely not." "Daddy, listen. You're 17, Simone. This isn't your school's debate." Club Simone stood, matching her father's intensity. "I know that. But I also know the law. Grandpa taught me everything he knew. I've been studying his cases since I was 12. "Baby," Sarah began gently, "this is Richard Bancroft we're talking about. His legal team isn't just lawyers. They're sharks. They destroy people for fun. And they're trying to destroy us right now." Simone's voice rose with passion. "They're using this fake arson charge to take everything. Our home, Mom's daycare license, Dad's job at the school. All because we wouldn't sell our property for their luxury condos." She moved to the living room, returning with her grandfather's framed law degree. Grandpa fought battles like this his whole life. He was one of the first black lawyers in this city. People threatened him, mocked him, tried to run him out of business, but he never backed down. Marcus softened slightly. "Your grandfather was a great man, baby girl. But he was also a trained lawyer with years of experience." "And who trained him?" Simone countered. "He taught himself from books just like I'm doing. He took the bar exam after studying on his own because no law school would accept him. He learned by doing, by fighting the battles no one else would take." She pulled out her grandfather's copy of the state legal code, its pages marked with sticky notes and highlighter. "There's precedent for this. In extraordinary circumstances, a non-attorney can represent family members in court. I've researched thoroughly." Sarah sank into a chair, her breakfast forgotten. "Even if it's legally possible, baby, the risk is too high. These people are dangerous. More dangerous than letting them take everything?" Simone spread her research across the table. "Look at this. The fire inspector's report is full of inconsistencies. The security footage they're using doesn't show what they claim. And Mrs. Walker next door, she saw something that night." A knock at the door made them all jump. Marcus approached cautiously, checking through the peephole before opening it to reveal Eleanor Walker, their neighbor of 20 years. The elderly woman clutched her purse tightly, her eyes darting nervously. "Heard about Mr. Patterson," she said, stepping inside. "I've been scared to speak up, but I can't stay quiet anymore. I was up late that night watching my programs. I saw someone at that warehouse and it wasn't any of you." Simone immediately grabbed her notebook. "Mrs. Walker, would you be willing to testify to that?" The woman's hands twisted together anxiously. "My Tommy. He works for one of Bancroft's companies. If I speak up—" "We understand," Sarah assured her, but Simone pressed on. "Mrs. Walker, remember when you used to tell me stories about the civil rights movement? About standing up when things were wrong no matter how scared you were?" Simone's voice was gentle but firm. "This is one of those moments. They're trying to destroy an entire community, starting with us." The older woman looked around the room, taking in the legal books and scattered papers. Her eyes settled on William Johnson's law degree. "Your grandfather. He defended my family once, when no one else would. The bank was trying to take our home on false pretenses." She straightened her shoulders. "I'll testify. It's time I returned the favor." For the next hour, Simone interviewed Mrs. Walker thoroughly, her questions precise and methodical. She documented every detail, the time, the weather conditions, what she saw and heard. Her parents watched in amazement as their daughter transformed before their eyes, channeling her grandfather's professional demeanor. After Mrs. Walker left, the family gathered in the living room. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the floor as they considered their options. "What exactly would this involve?" Marcus finally asked. "If we let you do this?" Simone pulled out her timeline. "First, I'd file a notice of appearance as counsel, along with a motion for permission to proceed as non-attorney representation. We'd have a hearing on that motion, where I'd need to demonstrate my knowledge of relevant law and procedure." Sarah leaned forward. "And if they approve it?" Then we prepare for trial. We'll need to gather evidence, interview witnesses, file preliminary motions. Simone's voice grew stronger as she outlined her strategy. We'll focus on the inconsistencies in their case, build a timeline that proves we couldn't have done this. Marcus exchanged a look with his wife. They could see William's spirit in their daughter. The same determination. The same unwavering belief in justice. If we do this, Marcus said slowly, we do it smart. You'll need help with the research, with preparing documents. I know, Daddy. And you'll need to be careful. These people, they don't play fair. Simone nodded. I understand. Sarah reached for her daughter's hand. Your grandfather always said you were destined for great things. I don't think this is what he had in mind, but... She managed a small smile. He'd be right here helping you if he could. The next morning, Simone stood before the courthouse, its imposing columns reaching toward the sky. She wore her best dress, her hair neatly braided, her documents organized, in a borrowed briefcase. Her hand trembled slightly as she pushed through the heavy doors, but her steps were steady. The clerk's office was quiet, just opening for the day. Simone approached the counter, standing as tall as she could. I need to file a notice of appearance as counsel, she said clearly, for the defendants in Johnson versus Bancroft developments. The clerk looked up, clearly expecting an adult. Her eyes widened as she took in Simone's youth. You're the counsel? Yes, ma'am. Simone laid out her carefully prepared documents. I've included a motion for permission to proceed as non-attorney counsel, citing relevant precedents and extraordinary circumstances. All the required forms are completed, and I've included supporting documentation. The clerk reviewed the papers slowly, her expression shifting from skepticism to curiosity. Everything appears to be in order. The hearing on your motion will be scheduled for next Monday at 9 a.m. Courtroom 3. Thank you. Simone gathered her copies, her heart pounding, but her voice steady. As she descended the courthouse steps, she noticed a sleek black car idling across the street. A man in an expensive suit watched her through tinted windows. Her spine stiffened, but she didn't break stride. Let them watch. Let them underestimate her. Back home, she found her parents waiting anxiously. It's done, she announced. The hearing is set for Monday. Sarah pulled her into a tight embrace. Baby, are you sure about this? It's not too late to... I'm sure, Mama. Simone hugged her back, then stepped away to spread her documents across the dining room table. Now we prepare. We have 5 days to get ready for the hearing, and I intend to use every minute. The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity. Simone converted the living room into a makeshift law office, with case files and legal books, covering every surface. Her mother brought sandwiches that went largely untouched. Her father helped organize documents, his maintenance supervisor's eye for detail proving invaluable. As evening fell, Simone stood at her bedroom window, looking out over their neighborhood. Pine Grove had been home to generations of families, its modest houses filled with history and pride. Now Richard Bancroft wanted to tear it all down, replace their community with luxury condos and high-end shops. She thought of her grandfather, of all the battles he'd fought in that courthouse. She thought of Mrs. Walker, finding her courage after years of silence. She thought of her parents, their lives and legacy hanging in the balance. Justice doesn't wait for convenient timing, she whispered, echoing her grandfather's words. Sometimes you have to step up when nobody else will. The sunset painted the sky in shades of red and gold, a fitting backdrop for the battle ahead. In his downtown office, Richard Bancroft was probably laughing at the idea of a teenage girl challenging his empire. His lawyers were probably already planning how to crush this unexpected development. But Simone Johnson, 17 years old and armed with determination, knowledge, and her community's support, was ready for the fight of her life. Monday would come soon enough, and with it, the chance to prove that sometimes the most powerful weapon against injustice is the courage to stand up and say no more. Morning light filtered through the courthouse's stained glass windows, casting colored shadows across the polished marble floors. Simone Johnson stood before the heavy wooden doors of courtroom 302, her heart thundering in her chest. The motion hearing had granted her permission to represent her family, but today was different. Today was the real battle. Her mother's hand squeezed her shoulder gently. "You don't have to do this, baby," Sarah whispered, smoothing an invisible wrinkle from Simone's modest navy suit, a thrift store find they'd carefully tailored the night before. "Yes, I do, Mama." Simone clutched her grandfather's worn leather briefcase, drawing strength from its familiar scratches and scuffs. Inside were her meticulously prepared opening statements, evidence files, and the dog-eared legal texts she'd studied until her eyes burned. Marcus Johnson adjusted his tie, the same one he'd worn to William's funeral 2 years ago. "Remember what your grandfather always said about Judge Kessler?" Simone nodded. Malcolm Kessler's reputation was legendary in Pine Grove's black community, and not in a good way. 20 years on the bench had earned him a reputation for favoring the wealthy and powerful, particularly in cases involving minority defendants. "He's going to try to rattle you," Marcus continued. "Don't let him." The courthouse was unusually crowded for a Monday morning. Word had spread about the teenage girl representing her family against Richard Bancroft's empire. Curious onlookers and reporters filled the hallway, their whispers following Simone like autumn leaves in the wind. A tall woman in an impeccable charcoal suit strode past them, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. Victoria Hale, Bancroft's lead attorney, didn't spare them a glance as she swept into the courtroom. 2 junior associates trailed behind her, pushing carts laden with documents. "All rise!" The bailiff's voice boomed through the courtroom as Judge Malcolm Kessler emerged from his chambers. Tall and lean, with steel gray hair and cold blue eyes, he carried himself with the authority of someone used to absolute control of his domain. His gaze swept the courtroom, pausing briefly on Simone before settling on his clerk. "I understand we have some irregular circumstances today," he drawled, his tone making it clear exactly what he thought of those circumstances. "Yes, Your Honor." Victoria Hale stood, elegant and predatory. "Though I must again object to the defendant's choice of representation." Her lips curved in a smile that never reached her eyes. Surely this mockery of proper legal procedure. "Your objection was noted and overruled at the motion hearing." Kessler cut her off, though his expression suggested agreement. He turned to Simone. "Miss Johnson, I expect you to conduct yourself with the decorum this court demands. Any deviation will result in immediate sanctions. Is that clear?" Simone rose on slightly shaky legs. "Yes, Your Honor." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Very well." Kessler settled into his chair. "Ms. Hale, you may proceed with your opening statement." Victoria Hale moved to address the jury with practiced grace. "Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about accountability. On the night of September 15th, a fire destroyed a warehouse owned by Bancroft Developments, causing millions in damages and putting dozens of jobs at risk. The evidence will show that the Johnson family, facing financial difficulties and bitter about proposed community development, deliberately set that fire." She proceeded to outline a damning narrative. Security footage placing a figure matching Marcus Johnson's description near the warehouse. Receipts for accelerants supposedly purchased by Sarah Johnson, and witness statements suggesting the family had threatened to stop Bancroft one way or another. Simone took careful notes, her grandfather's voice echoing in her memory. "Let them talk. Every lie they tell is another chance to show the truth. The prosecution will prove beyond any doubt," Hale concluded, "that the Johnson family chose destruction over progress, revenge over reason. They must be held accountable for their actions." Judge Kessler turned to Simone. "Miss Johnson, your opening statement." Simone stood, forcing her trembling hands to be still. She'd practiced this moment 100 times in front of her bedroom mirror, but facing the actual jury was infinitely more daunting. "Members of the jury," she began, her voice catching slightly. She glanced at her parents, drawing strength from their presence. "The truth is—" "Speak up, Miss Johnson," Kessler interrupted sharply. "This is a courtroom, not a school cafeteria." Scattered laughter rippled through the gallery. Simone felt heat rise in her cheeks but lifted her chin and started again, louder this way. "The truth is simple. My family is innocent, The evidence Ms. Hale presented is fabricated, manipulated to frame honest people who dared to stand in the way of Richard Bancroft's plans. Objection. Hale rose smoothly. Argumentative and inflammatory. Sustained. Kessler's gavel cracked like a whip. Miss Johnson, contain your theatrical accusations. Simone adjusted her approach, remembering her grandfather's advice about hostile judges. The defense will prove that on the night of September 15th, the Johnson family was at home, hosting a prayer meeting with neighbors. We'll show that the security footage has been selectively edited, that the supposed receipts for accelerants don't exist, and that the witness statements Ms. Hale mentioned were obtained through coercion. Objection. Hale again. Sustained. Kessler glared at Simone. One more unfounded accusation of misconduct, Miss Johnson, and you'll be held in contempt. Simone pressed on, her voice growing stronger. Most importantly, we'll present evidence that the fire started in areas of the warehouse that would have been impossible for anyone to access from the outside. The truth will show that my family is being targeted not because of evidence, but because we refuse to sell our home to Bancroft Developments. She continued outlining their defense, watching the jurors' faces. Some seemed skeptical, others curious. One elderly woman in the back row nodded slightly, reminding Simone of Mrs. Walker. The prosecution wants you to see this case as being about accountability, Simone concluded. They're right, but not in the way they claim. This case is about holding the powerful accountable when they try to destroy innocent lives for profit. Thank you. She sat down, her heart racing. Her father squeezed her hand under the table. Ms. Hale, call your first witness, Kessler instructed. Victoria. Hale approached the podium. The prosecution calls James Morrison, head of security for Bancroft Developments. A broad-shouldered man in a security uniform took the stand. His testimony was polished, obviously rehearsed. He described the security systems, the regular patrols, and the events of September 15th. And you personally observed someone matching Marcus Johnson's description near the warehouse that night? Hale asked. Objection. Simone stood. The witness's statement contradicts his initial report to police, which noted that visibility was too poor to identify any individuals. Kessler's eyes narrowed. Miss Johnson, are you planning to impeach this witness? Yes, Your Honor. I have his signed police statement. Then save it for cross-examination. Objection overruled. Morrison continued his testimony, each word driving another nail into the case against her family. Simone documented every inconsistency, every slight variation from his previous statements. When Hale finished, Kessler turned to Simone. Your witness, Miss Johnson. Simone approached the podium, her notes ready. Mr. Morrison, you testified that you saw someone matching my father's description at 11:45 p.m., correct? That's right. And you're certain of the time? Absolutely. I check my watch regularly during patrols. Simone pulled out a document. I have here your time card from September 15th showing you clocked out at 11:30 p.m. Can you explain how you saw someone at 11:45 when you weren't on the premises? Objection, Hale stood. This document wasn't provided in discovery. Because the prosecution didn't provide Mr. Morrison's employment records as requested, Simone countered. We obtained them through a subpoena last week. Kessler scowled. Approach the bench, both of you. Simone walked forward, intensely aware of how young she must look next to Victoria Hale's polished professionalism. Miss Johnson, Kessler practically spat her name. I won't have you playing games in my courtroom. This kind of ambush, Your Honor, Simone interrupted, immediately regretting it as Kessler's face darkened. The prosecution failed to provide requested documents. We followed proper procedure to obtain them independently. Under Rule 37 of, don't quote rules to me, young lady. I've been practicing law since before your parents were born. Then you know I'm right, Simone said quietly, holding his gaze. The silence stretched for a moment before Kessler growled. I'll allow it. But watch yourself, Miss Johnson. My patience has limits. Back at the podium, Simone pressed on. Mr. Morrison, would you like to revise your testimony about the time? The security guard glanced at Victoria Hale, who was writing something furiously on a legal pad. I might have been mistaken about the exact time. Might have been. Simone pushed. Just like you might have been mistaken when you claimed to definitely identify someone in conditions you previously described as too dark to see clearly. Objection? Argumentative? Sustained. Kessler's tone could have frozen water. Miss Johnson, conduct yourself properly, or this cross-examination is over. Simone adjusted her approach, methodically exposing the contradictions in Morrison's testimony without directly challenging him. By the time she finished, his credibility was noticeably damaged. As Morrison stepped down, Simone caught Victoria Hale watching her with new intensity. The message was clear. The kid gloves were coming off. The prosecution calls Sandra Martinez, Hale announced. A nervous-looking woman took the stand. Simone recognized her. She worked at the hardware store where Sarah Johnson had supposedly purchased accelerants. Hale walked Martinez through her testimony about selling specific chemicals to Sarah, producing a receipt as evidence. Simone waited, letting the prosecution build their narrative. During cross-examination, Simone established that Martinez hadn't actually been working on the day in question. She'd been at her daughter's graduation. The receipt, when examined closely, showed signs of alteration. Miss Johnson, Kessler warned as Martinez began to cry under questioning. Badgering witnesses will not be tolerated. I'm simply establishing the truth, Your Honor. Simone turned back to Martinez. Ms. Martinez, did anyone pressure you to testify today? Objection. Withdrawn, Simone said quickly, but the damage was done. Martinez's expression had already answered the question. The day continued with a parade of prosecution witnesses, each one carefully prepared but carrying subtle inconsistencies that Simone methodically exposed. She could feel the jury's attitude shifting, see the growing frustration in Victoria Hale's perfect posture. Judge Kessler grew increasingly hostile, sustaining almost every prosecution objection while overruling most of Simone's. But she persisted, her grandfather's teachings guiding every question. By late afternoon, even the spectators could sense that the prosecution's case wasn't as solid as it had appeared. Victoria Hale's smooth confidence showed hints of strain, while Simone's nervous energy had transformed into focused determination. Court is adjourned until 9 a.m. tomorrow, Kessler announced finally. Miss Johnson, I expect you to review proper courtroom procedure before we reconvene. This is not a high school mock trial. As the gallery emptied, Simone felt her mother's arms wrap around her. You did good, baby, Sarah whispered. Your grandfather would be so proud. Marcus nodded, his eyes suspiciously bright. You stood your ground. Not many people do that with Kessler. Simone began gathering her documents, her hands shaking now that the adrenaline was wearing off. Through the courtroom windows, she could see Richard Bancroft himself standing by a sleek car, speaking intensely with Victoria Hale. This is just the beginning, she murmured, watching them. They're going to hit back hard tomorrow. Then we'll hit back harder, Marcus said firmly. Together. As they left the courthouse, reporters called out questions, cameras flashing. Simone kept walking, her head high. She'd scored some points today, but tomorrow would bring new challenges. Victoria Hale wouldn't underestimate her again, and Judge Kessler would only become more difficult. But for now, she had hope. She'd seen it in the jurors' faces, doubt about the prosecution's case, interest in her cross-examinations. She'd seen it in Victoria Hale's growing frustration and in Richard Bancroft's unscheduled appearance. Most importantly, she'd felt it in herself. The terrified teenager who'd walked into court that morning was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who could fight for justice just as her grandfather had done. As they drove home, Simone reviewed her notes for tomorrow, preparing for the battles ahead. The sunset painted the sky in shades of purple and gold, a fitting end to a day that had changed everything. She thought of Judge Kessler's contempt, of Victoria Hale's subtle threats, of Richard Bancroft's cold stare. They thought they could break her, wear her down, force her to give up. They were wrong. Simone Johnson, 17 years old and standing alone against a system designed to crush people like her, was just getting started. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but she was ready. Justice, as her grandfather always said, doesn't come easy, but it comes to those who fight for it. Richard Bancroft's corner office commanded a view of the entire city, the courthouse dome visible in the distance. Like a crown jewel in his urban empire, he stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, hands clasped behind his back, watching the sunset while Victoria Hale delivered her report on the day's proceedings. "The girl is more competent than we anticipated," Hale admitted, her usual polish showing signs of wear. She exposed Morrison's timeline discrepancy and managed to rattle Martinez on the stand. Bancroft didn't turn from the window. "I don't pay you to be outmaneuvered by children, Victoria." "It won't happen again." Hale's voice hardened. "I've already set several things in motion. By tomorrow morning, our position will be significantly stronger. Make sure of it." Bancroft finally faced her, his expression cold. "I didn't spend 20 years building this empire to have it threatened by some teenage crusader with her grandfather's law books." In his private conference room down the hall, a meeting was already underway. City officials, carefully chosen, for their flexibility when it came to ethics, sat around a mahogany table as thick envelopes were distributed. "Consider this a gesture of appreciation for your continued support," Bancroft's assistant explained smoothly. "Mr. Bancroft understands the challenges of public service and wants to ensure you can focus on what's best for the city." One official, newer to the game, shifted uncomfortably. "The timing of this, with the trial ongoing, is purely coincidental," the assistant finished, "though Mr. Bancroft would appreciate your attention to certain pending matters." Across town, in the modest Pine Grove neighborhood, Simone sat at her makeshift desk in the living room, surrounded by case files and legal documents. Her eyes burned from hours of reading, but she couldn't stop. Something about the prosecution's evidence wasn't adding up. "Baby, you need to rest," Sarah called from the kitchen. "You've been at it for hours." "Just a little longer, Mama." Simone pulled up another document on her laptop, comparing it to the hard copies spread before her. These financial records they submitted. Something's wrong with them. Marcus emerged from his study, where he'd been reviewing his own bank statements. "What kind of wrong?" "The transactions they're using to prove we bought materials for the fire." Simone traced the numbers with her finger. "The dates match, but the transaction IDs don't follow the bank's normal sequence." A knock at the door made them all freeze. Since the trial began, unexpected visitors had become a source of anxiety. Marcus checked through the peephole before opening the door to reveal Mrs. Walker, her face pale with worry. "Eleanor?" Sarah moved to help the elderly woman to a chair. "What's wrong?" "They came to see Tommy." Mrs. Walker's hands trembled as she clutched her purse. "Men from Bancroft's company. They said they were doing a performance review, but..." She swallowed hard. "They knew about my testimony. Said it would be a shame if Tommy lost his job in these difficult times." Simone's stomach clenched. "They threatened his job to keep you from testifying?" Mrs. Walker nodded, tears in her eyes. "Tommy has a baby on the way. He can't lose that job. I'm so sorry, but I can't testify anymore." Sarah hugged the older woman while Simone paced, her mind racing. "Did anyone else come forward about seeing something that night?" Marcus shook his head. "James from 2 doors down said he heard something, but now he's saying he must have been mistaken. And the Robinson family suddenly decided to take a vacation. They're silencing everyone." Simone ran her hands through her braids in frustration. "How are we supposed to fight back when they can just buy or threaten every witness?" Her phone buzzed with a text from her friend Ashley, a junior clerk at the courthouse. "Check your email. Fast." Simone opened her laptop, clicking on the new message. Her eyes widened as she read. "The prosecution just filed an emergency motion. They're claiming to have new evidence, surveillance footage from a second camera, and updated financial records." "But that's good, right?" Sarah asked. "If they're submitting new evidence, we get time to review it." "Usually, yes." Simone was already pulling up legal references. But they're requesting an expedited hearing tomorrow morning before the trial resumes. They're claiming it's time-sensitive evidence that could be destroyed if we delay. Marcus leaned over her shoulder to read. Can they do that? They shouldn't be able to. The rules of discovery require... Simone's voice trailed off as she read further. Judge Kessler already granted their motion. The hearing is set for 7 a.m. tomorrow. That's not even normal courthouse hours, Sarah protested. Nothing about this is normal, Mama. Simone checked the time, 9:47 p.m. I need to prepare. They're trying to blindside us with this evidence before I can properly review it. She worked through the night, fueled by coffee and determination. Her parents tried to convince her to rest, but eventually gave up and took turns keeping her company. Sarah brought sandwiches that went untouched. Marcus helped organize documents, his maintenance supervisor's eye for detail proving invaluable. Around 3 in the morning, Simone found something interesting in the case law. Look at this. Thompson versus State, 2019. The court ruled that rushed evidence submissions without adequate time for review constitute a violation of due process. Can you use that? Marcus asked, stifling a yawn. Maybe, if I can show they're deliberately timing this to prevent proper examination of the evidence. She made more notes, her handwriting growing messier with fatigue. Dawn found them still, working. Simone changed into her court suit, her movements mechanical with exhaustion. Sarah insisted on breakfast, but Simone could barely manage a few bites of toast. They arrived at the courthouse at 6:45 a.m. to find Victoria Hale already there, looking fresh and impeccable. She smiled when she saw Simone's tired face. Late night, Miss Johnson? Perhaps this case is too demanding for someone your age. Simone ignored her, setting up her materials at the defense table. Judge Kessler entered promptly at 7 a.m. looking irritated at the early hour. Your Honor, Simone began as soon as they were seated. The defense objects to this expedited hearing. Under Thompson versus State, the prosecution's timing. Save your objections, Miss Johnson, Kessler cut her off. The prosecution has presented compelling reasons for urgency. Ms. Hale, proceed. Victoria Hale approached the bench with a flash drive. Your Honor, we've discovered additional surveillance footage from a secondary camera. This angle clearly shows Marcus Johnson leaving the scene of the fire. The footage played on the courtroom's monitor. A figure in a dark jacket moved through the frame, face briefly visible in a flash of light. The timestamp matched the night of the fire. Objection. Simone stood. This footage shows signs of digital manipulation. The lighting is inconsistent with... Do you have an expert witness to testify to these allegations? Kessler demanded. If the court would grant time to have the footage analyzed, denied. The footage appears authentic to this court. What else, Ms. Hale? Hale produced a stack of documents. We've also obtained complete financial records showing transfers from the Johnson family's accounts to an offshore entity known to purchase industrial accelerants. Simone's heart raced as she examined the documents. The transaction IDs now formed a perfect sequence. Too perfect. Your Honor, these records contradict the ones submitted yesterday. They can't both be authentic. Perhaps you misread the previous records, Miss Johnson. You are, after all, not a trained attorney. Simone fought to keep her voice steady. The defense requests time to have these records authenticated by a forensic accountant. Request denied. This hearing was called specifically because of the time-sensitive nature of this evidence. Kessler's gavel cracked sharply. The new evidence is admitted. We'll resume regular trial proceedings at 9. Outside the courtroom, Simone leaned against the wall, fighting exhaustion and despair. Her father wrapped an arm around her shoulders. They're just making things up now, she whispered. How do we fight evidence they can create overnight? The same way your grandfather did, Marcus replied. One piece at a time. What are they trying to hide with all this rushed evidence? Simone straightened, her mind starting to clear. You're right. They're trying to bury something. But what? She pulled out her phone, texting Ashley. Need help. Can you check something? The response came quickly. Break room in 10 mins. Bring coffee. Simone found Ashley in the courthouse break room, nervously checking over her shoulder. I could lose my job for this, the clerk whispered. sliding a folder across the table. I know. Thank you. Simone opened the folder to find copying records. When did the prosecution request duplicates of their submitted evidence? Last night, around midnight. They took the originals and left copies in the file. Ashley fidgeted, with her coffee cup. But get this, I overheard Hale on the phone earlier. Something about replacing the inconsistencies before someone named Thompson could review them. Simone's pulse quickened. Thompson? Robert Thompson? The forensic accountant? Ashley nodded. Sounds like they found out he was consulting for you guys. Simone had reached out to her grandfather's old friend days ago but hadn't heard back. Now she knew why. They're covering their tracks. The original evidence had flaws that Thompson would have found, so they're replacing it all. Miss Johnson? A uniformed officer approached their table. Judge Kessler wants to see you in his chambers immediately. Simone gathered her materials, squeezing Ashley's hand in thanks before following the officer. Her parents waited anxiously in the hallway as she entered Kessler's chambers. The judge sat behind his massive desk, Victoria Hale standing beside him. Miss Johnson, Ms. Hale has brought some concerns to my attention. There are allegations that you've been attempting to tamper with evidence. What? Simone's exhaustion vanished in a surge of anger. That's completely false. A courthouse employee reports you attempting to access original documents without proper authorization, Hale said smoothly. Given your unusual status as counsel, this raises serious ethical concerns. I was reviewing copies, which I have every right to do. Simone fought to keep her voice level. And if we're discussing ethical concerns, perhaps we should address the prosecution's midnight evidence swap. Kessler's face darkened. Watch yourself, Miss Johnson. One more unfounded accusation and I'll have you removed as counsel. Is that clear? Crystal clear, Your Honor. Simone met his gaze steadily. Will that be all? Back in the hallway, she briefed her parents in whispers. Sarah's face crumpled with worry, but Marcus looked thoughtful. They're scared, he said quietly. All this maneuvering? They wouldn't bother if they weren't worried about something. Simone nodded slowly. The timeline of the fire. They keep trying to establish where everyone was when everything happened. But why? The fire marshal's report already established the timing. She pulled out her copy of the report, scanning it again. Suddenly, her eyes widened. Wait. Look at this. The fire started in multiple locations simultaneously, but the security footage only shows one person. Even if it really was Dad, he couldn't have been in 3 places at once. Can you prove it? Sarah asked. Maybe. Simone checked her watch. 8:45 a.m. But I'll have to do it in open court. They're not giving us any other options. As they walked to the courtroom, Simone spotted Richard Bancroft talking with a group of city officials near the water fountain. He caught her looking, and smiled, cold and confident. Let him smile, she thought. Her grandfather had taught her that the truth had a way of coming out, no matter how hard people tried to bury it. The prosecution's frantic evidence manipulation proved they were hiding something. Now she just had to figure out what it was. The courtroom was already filling up as they entered. Victoria Hale sat at the prosecution table, examining documents with her team. She looked fresh and composed, while Simone felt like she'd aged years in one sleepless night. But exhaustion would have to wait. Somewhere in all this manufactured evidence and manipulated footage was the key to proving her family's innocence. Bancroft and his allies thought they could overwhelm a teenage girl with legal maneuvers and fake documents. They were about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous opponent is the one you've underestimated. As Judge Kessler took the bench, Simone straightened her shoulders and opened her grandfather's briefcase. Time to show them what a Johnson was really capable of. The courtroom hummed with tension as Victoria Hale called her next witness. The prosecution calls Thomas Franklin, head of security camera operations for Bancroft Developments. Simone watched the witness take the stand, her mind racing despite her exhaustion. Franklin was new. His name hadn't appeared in any previous witness lists. She scribbled a note to her father. Another last-minute surprise. Marcus nodded grimly, his expression matching her suspicion. After the morning's rushed evidence hearing, they were prepared for more manipulation. Franklin was sworn in, his crisp uniform and military bearing lending him an air of authority. Hale approached with practiced confidence. "Mr. Franklin, please, explain your role in maintaining the security systems at Bancroft Properties. I oversee all camera installations, maintenance, and footage review for the entire Bancroft portfolio," Franklin testified. "Every camera, every recording, every backup system runs through my department." "And were you responsible for discovering the additional footage presented this morning?" "Yes, ma'am. During a routine system audit, I found that a secondary backup had captured additional angles of the incident." Simone's pen moved rapidly across her legal pad. Something in Franklin's testimony didn't match the technical specifications she'd reviewed. She pulled out the security system documentation from her grandfather's briefcase, comparing notes as Hale continued her questioning. "Could you explain to the jury what we're seeing in this new footage?" Hale gestured for the clip to be played again. Franklin leaned forward. The timestamp shows 11:47 p.m. on September 15th. The figure entering from the left matches Mr. Johnson's height and build. When the security light activates, you can clearly see his face. "Objection." Simone stood. "The witness is speculating about identification." "Overruled," Judge Kessler snapped. "The jury can evaluate the witness's expertise." Hale smiled slightly. "Mr. Franklin, in your professional opinion, how reliable is this footage?" "Completely reliable. Our system uses military-grade encryption and timestamping. It's impossible to alter without leaving traces." Simone tensed, waiting for her moment. Hale continued leading Franklin through a detailed technical explanation, establishing his credentials and the footage's authenticity. Finally, she returned to her seat. "Your witness, Miss Johnson." Simone approached the podium, forcing herself to move with deliberate calm despite her racing heart. "Mr. Franklin, you testified that you oversee all camera installations for Bancroft Properties, correct?" "That's correct." "Including the warehouse in question?" "Yes." Simone retrieved a document from her files. "I have here the original security system installation contract from 2018. Are you familiar with it?" Franklin shifted slightly. "Generally, yes." "The contract specifies model TR-750 cameras with enhanced night vision capabilities. Is that accurate?" "Yes, that's our standard installation." Simone approached with another document. "This is the manufacturer's specification sheet for the TR-750. Could you read the highlighted section?" Franklin hesitated, glancing at Victoria Hale before reading. TR-750 units process and store footage in proprietary .NVR format, requiring dedicated servers for backup and retrieval. Yet the footage you discovered is in standard .MP4 format. Can you explain that discrepancy? The witness's composure cracked slightly. "We convert files for courtroom presentation." "Really?" Simone pulled out another document. "Because according to the TR-750 manual, format conversion destroys the encrypted timestamp data you just testified was impossible to alter. How do you explain that?" "Objection." Hale was on her feet. "Miss Johnson is badgering the witness." "I'm establishing the authenticity of key evidence," Simone countered. "Evidence that was rushed through this morning specifically to avoid proper examination." Judge Kessler's face darkened, but before he could respond, Franklin spoke. "The conversion was done by our technical team. I'd have to consult with them about the specific process. The same technical team that somehow missed this secondary backup for 3 months, only finding it the night before a crucial testimony," Simone pressed. "Mr. Franklin, when exactly were you hired by Bancroft Developments?" The witness swallowed hard. 2 weeks ago." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Simone let the implications sink in before continuing. "So you weren't actually present for the system installation you just testified about?" "I reviewed the documentation." "Did you review it before or after the prosecution contacted you to testify?" "Objection," Hale nearly shouted. "Counsel is impugning the witness's integrity." The witness impugned his own integrity by claiming first-hand knowledge of events that predated his employment, Simone responded. "I move to strike his entire testimony as perjury." The gallery erupted in whispers. Judge Kessler banged his gavel repeatedly. "Order. Miss Johnson, approach the bench. You too, Ms. Hale. As they approached, Kessler's face was almost purple with rage. Miss Johnson, you are treading on very thin ice. Your Honor, Simone kept her voice steady. The prosecution presented a witness who falsely claimed direct knowledge of critical evidence. This goes beyond aggressive tactics into outright fraud. These are serious allegations, Hale interjected, smoothly. Perhaps Miss Johnson's youth and inexperience are leading her to see conspiracy where there's merely miscommunication. There's nothing miscommunicated about perjury, Simone shot back. The prosecution is deliberately presenting false testimony. Kessler glared at both attorneys. Step back. I'll review the testimony and rule on the motion to strike. As they returned to their tables, Simone caught her father's proud smile. She'd scored a direct hit, and everyone knew it. Victoria Hale's perfect composure showed cracks as she whispered intensely with her team. After a tense few minutes, Kessler spoke. The witness's testimony regarding systems predating his employment is stricken. The jury will disregard those portions. However, his authentication of the recent footage stands. It wasn't a complete victory, but Simone had planted seeds of doubt about the prosecution's evidence. She noticed several jurors watching Franklin with newfound skepticism as he left the stand. The prosecution calls Margaret Whitman, Hale announced, her voice slightly less confident than before. An elegantly dressed woman took the stand, introducing herself as the CFO of Bancroft Developments. Her testimony focused on the company's financial records, attempting to establish motive by claiming the Johnsons were in severe financial distress. This time, Simone let the direct examination proceed without objection, taking detailed notes. When her turn came, she approached with quiet confidence. Ms. Whitman, you testified about my family's financial difficulties. Could you specify what records you reviewed to reach that conclusion? Certainly. We obtained credit reports, bank statements, and property records showing multiple late payments and declining account balances. Simone nodded thoughtfully. And when did you obtain these records? During our standard due diligence process when evaluating properties for acquisition. You mean when Bancroft Developments was trying to buy our house? Objection. Hale stood. Relevance. Goes to motive, Your Honor, Simone replied. The prosecution claims we were in financial distress. I'm establishing the timeline of their knowledge. Kessler frowned but nodded. Proceed. Simone turned back to Whitman. So you reviewed our financial records as part of a potential property purchase. When was that? Approximately 6 months ago. Before or after my parents declined Bancroft's offer? The CFO's expression tightened. Before. And did you conduct any further financial review after they refused to sell? Not directly. Simone retrieved another document. I have here a credit inquiry notice showing Bancroft Developments accessed my parents' records 3 more times after they declined the offer. Why was that necessary? Whitman glanced at Victoria Hale before answering. Standard procedure. Sabapar. It's standard procedure to run credit checks on people who've already refused to sell? Or was Bancroft Developments looking for financial pressure points? Objection! Hale was on her feet again. Argumentative. Sustained. Kessler glared at Simone. Watch yourself, Miss Johnson. But Simone had made her point. The jury could see the connection between Bancroft's failed acquisition attempt and the sudden scrutiny of the Johnson family's finances. She shifted tactics. Ms. Whitman, you mentioned late payments in our accounts. Could you specify which payments? Your mortgage was late twice in the past year. Simone pulled out bank records. Would it surprise you to learn that those late payments occurred immediately after our bank accounts were frozen due to suspicious activity? I wasn't aware of that. The same suspicious activity that the bank later confirmed was due to external attempts to access our accounts. Simone pressed. Attempts that originated from IP addresses registered to Bancroft Developments? The courtroom erupted again. Victoria Hale was on her feet, objecting furiously, but the damage was done. The jury had heard the connection between their financial troubles and Bancroft's interference. Judge Kessler called a 15-minute recess. As the gallery emptied, Simone felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to find Mrs. Walker standing there, tears in her eyes. "I'm so sorry, I almost backed out," the elderly woman whispered. "Watching you fight like this, it reminds me of your grandfather. He never let them intimidate him either." Simone hugged her, drawing strength from the connection to her community and her family's legacy. When she returned to the defense table, she found a note had been slipped into her grandfather's briefcase. "Loading dock security camera number 3, the note read in Ashley's handwriting. "Check the blind spot timing." Simone quickly pulled up the warehouse blueprints, comparing them to the security camera layouts. Her eyes widened as she spotted something they'd all missed. "Dad," she whispered, showing him her discovery. "Look at this. Camera number 3 doesn't cover the loading dock entrance. There's a 4-minute gap in the coverage where anyone could have entered unseen." Marcus studied the documents, and that gap lines up with the exact time they claim you were there. Simone's mind raced. They didn't just edit the footage. They chose that specific time because they knew there wouldn't be evidence to contradict it. The bailiff called the court back to order. Victoria. Hale approached the bench, requesting to call a surprise witness. Simone tensed, preparing for another ambush, but this time she was ready. As Richard Bancroft himself strode to the witness stand, his expensive suit and confident smile projecting absolute authority, Simone felt strangely calm. Let him testify. Every lie they told was another opportunity to expose the truth. She opened her grandfather's briefcase, touching the worn leather for luck. William Johnson had faced men like Bancroft before. Wealthy, powerful men who thought their money put them above the law. He'd taught her that justice doesn't bow to power. The afternoon sun slanted through the courthouse windows, casting long shadows across the floor. In those shadows, Simone could almost see her grandfather standing beside her, ready to help her fight one more battle for justice. Victoria Hale began her questioning, but Simone barely heard her. She was focused on her notes, on the patterns emerging from all the prosecution's carefully constructed evidence. They'd been so focused on creating a perfect narrative that they'd forgotten one crucial detail. The truth doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be true. As Bancroft testified about his company's legitimate business practices and community development plans, Simone allowed herself a small smile. The man who thought he could crush a teenage girl with manufactured evidence and bought testimony was about to learn a hard lesson about underestimating his opponents. The truth, as her grandfather always said, has a way of coming out. Sometimes it just needs someone brave enough to help it along. The email arrived at 2:47 a.m., its sender hidden behind layers of anonymity. Simone sat alone in her family's darkened living room, the laptop's glow illuminating her tired face as she read. "I worked in Bancroft's financial department for 6 years. I have proof the warehouse fire was insurance fraud. Meeting must be in person. Tomorrow, 5 a.m., Riverside Park near the old carousel. Come alone." Her finger hovered over the delete button. This could be a trap, another of Bancroft's manipulations. But after today's revelations about the security camera blind spots and financial interference, she couldn't ignore any potential lead. The house creaked, making her jump. Her parents' bedroom door opened upstairs, and Sarah's worried voice carried down, "Simone, baby, are you still up?" "Just reviewing some documents, Mama," she called back, quickly closing the email. Her mother didn't need more reasons to worry. Dawn was breaking over Riverside Park as Simone approached the carousel, her grandfather's briefcase clutched tightly. The morning fog rolled in from the river, shrouding the area in gray mist. Her heart pounded as a figure emerged from the shadows. Miss Johnson. The man was middle-aged, unremarkable in his brown suit and wire-rimmed glasses. "Thank you for coming. I'm Michael Peterson." Simone maintained her distance. "You worked for Bancroft?" "Until last week." Peterson glanced nervously over his shoulder. "What I'm about to show you, it could get me killed. But I can't stay quiet anymore." He pulled a flash drive from his pocket, along with a stack of documents. The warehouse fire wasn't random. Bancroft planned it months ago. The building was insured for 3 times its value through shell companies. Here's the proof. Simone accepted the documents with trembling hands. Internal memos, insurance policies, bank transfers, a paper trail leading directly to Richard Bancroft. Why? She asked. Why frame my family? 2 birds, 1 stone. Peterson's voice was bitter. Collect the insurance money and eliminate the biggest obstacle to his development plans. Your family's resistance was inspiring others to stand against him. He needed to make an example of you. Movement in the fog made them both tense. I have to go, Peterson whispered. Be careful who you trust. Bancroft has people everywhere. He melted back into the mist, leaving Simone alone with explosive evidence and mounting fear. The documents felt like fire in her hands, powerful enough to destroy Bancroft, but equally capable of burning anyone who held them. Back home, her parents were already awake. Marcus took one look at her face and knew something was wrong. What happened? Simone spread the documents across the kitchen table, explaining her early morning meeting. Sarah's hands flew to her mouth as she read the memos. Baby, this is too dangerous, she whispered. These people, they'll do anything to keep this quiet. We have to use it, Simone insisted. This proves everything. The insurance fraud, the false accusations, all of it. Marcus studied the papers with growing anger. They planned this for months, watched us, waited for the right moment, all because we wouldn't sell our home. A crash from outside made them all jump. Simone ran to the window, pulling back the curtain to see their car's windows shattered. The word "Leave" spray-painted across the hood. Get away from the window. Marcus pulled her back as Sarah called the police. Officers arrived quickly, but their investigation felt perfunctory. One glanced at the graffiti and suggested it was probably just kids causing trouble. Another mentioned how these things happen in changing neighborhoods. Simone watched them leave, her mind racing. They're trying to scare us into dropping the case. They're succeeding, Sarah said quietly. Maybe we should consider... No. Simone's voice was firm. This is exactly what Bancroft wants. Fear is his weapon. We can't let him win. She spent the morning preparing to present the new evidence, knowing Bancroft's team would fight to keep it out. The courthouse felt different as she approached, more ominous. Every passing face could be watching, reporting back to Bancroft. Victoria. Hale was waiting outside courtroom 302, her smile sharp as a knife. Miss Johnson, I heard about your car. Such a shame. These neighborhoods can be so unpredictable. Simone met her gaze steadily. Save the threats, Ms. Hale. We both know who's behind it. Threats? I'm simply expressing concern. Hale stepped closer, dropping her voice. Although, speaking of concern, I'd be very careful about presenting any questionable evidence today. Fabricated documents are a serious offense. Nothing's fabricated, but you'd know all about that, wouldn't you? Before Hale could respond, the bailiff called them into court. Judge Kessler was already scowling as Simone approached the bench. Your Honor, the defense has obtained new evidence proving Mr. Bancroft orchestrated the warehouse fire as part of an insurance fraud scheme. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Hale was on her feet instantly. Objection! These outrageous allegations are supported by extensive documentation, Simone continued, presenting copies of Peterson's evidence, internal memos, insurance policies, bank records. These documents are obviously fabricated, Hale interrupted. The defense is attempting to introduce fraudulent evidence. The documents can be authenticated, Simone argued. Their metadata and paper trail. Enough! Kessler's gavel crashed down. Miss Johnson, approach the bench. Ms. Hale, you too. Up close, Kessler's face was mottled with rage. Young lady, you are treading on extremely thin ice. These accusations against a respected businessman are true, Simone said firmly, and I can prove it. Your Honor, Hale interjected smoothly, setting aside the dubious origins of these documents, their late introduction would unfairly prejudice the jury. The prosecution has introduced last-minute evidence multiple times, Simone countered, including this morning's rushed hearing. That evidence was properly authenticated, Kessler snapped. These documents are inadmissible. One more attempt to present them, and I'll hold you in contempt. Is that clear? Simone returned to the defense table, her mind working furiously. They'd expected this. Bancroft's influence over Kessler was well known. But there had to be another way to get the truth out. She began her cross-examination of Bancroft's insurance adjuster, carefully laying groundwork. Mr. Stevens, you testified that the warehouse was insured for $12 million. What was its assessed value? Objection. Hale stood. Relevance. Goes to motive, Your Honor. The prosecution opened this door by discussing financial matters. Kessler frowned but nodded. Proceed. The property was valued at $4 million, Stevens admitted. Isn't it unusual for a property to be insured for 3 times its value? Properties are often insured above assessed value to cover contents and business interruption. Simone nodded thoughtfully. And who approved this particular insurance level? Stevens shifted uncomfortably. I don't recall specifically. Would it refresh your memory to review the policy documents? Objection. Hale again. Counsel is attempting to introduce the previously ruled inadmissible evidence. I'm referring to the insurance documents already in evidence, Simone corrected. Prosecution Exhibit 23. She had him. The official policy documents couldn't be reconciled with Peterson's evidence without exposing the fraud. Stevens began to sweat as she walked him through the discrepancies. A commotion at the back of the courtroom interrupted her questioning. Michael Peterson burst in, his face bloody, his suit torn. I have to testify, he shouted. They tried to kill me. Bancroft's men. 2 deputies grabbed him as Judge Kessler ordered the jury to disregard the outburst, but the damage was done. The jurors had seen Peterson, had heard his accusations. Some were whispering, connecting his appearance to the documents Hale had fought so hard to suppress. During the ensuing recess, Simone found Peterson in police custody. Are you okay? What happened? They were waiting at my apartment, he said, holding an ice pack to his face. I barely got away, but I had to come. The people need to know the truth. Mr. Peterson. Victoria Hale's voice was cold as she approached. I wonder if you've considered the consequences of perjury, your history of mental health issues, your gambling debts. Are you threatening him? Simone demanded, simply stating facts. Hale smiled. Facts that will come out if he insists on testifying. Back in session, Simone filed a formal complaint against Judge Kessler, citing bias and potential conflicts of interest. It was a risky move, but Peterson's appearance had given her an opening. Your Honor, given Mr. Peterson's allegations and the pattern of witness intimidation, I move for an immediate investigation into… Miss Johnson, Kessler's face was purple. I warned you about these baseless accusations. Your Honor! A man in a suit entered the courtroom showing credentials. I'm Thomas Ward, State Judicial Review Board. We've received multiple complaints about this case. I'm here to observe. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Kessler's bluster deflated, while Victoria Hale's perfect composure cracked slightly. Simone felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe the truth could come out after all. That hope was tested that evening when they returned home to find their house vandalized. Windows were broken, furniture overturned, and spray-painted warnings covered the walls. But most disturbing was William Johnson's law degree, smashed in its frame, a note attached. Next time it won't be glass breaking. Sarah broke down crying while Marcus called the police. Simone stood in her grandfather's study, glass crunching. Under her feet, rage building in her chest. I won't let them win, she whispered, picking up a shard of the broken frame. I won't let them destroy everything you built, Grandpa. Later that night, as they cleaned up the mess, Ashley called with news. The Judicial Review Board is launching a full investigation into Kessler. They're appointing a new judge tomorrow. Simone sat on her bed, surrounded by case files and broken glass. The stakes were escalating, the danger mounting with each revelation. But she thought of Michael Peterson, battered but still fighting for the truth. She thought of Mrs. Walker, finding her courage again. She thought of her grandfather, facing down threats and intimidation to build a legacy of justice. Tomorrow would bring a new judge and new challenges. Bancroft's desperation was showing. Each act of vandalism, each threat revealed his fear. The truth was getting too close to stay buried. As she finally drifted off to sleep, Simone's last thought was of Peterson's documents, safely hidden in her grandfather's old safe. Tomorrow she would find a way to present them, to make the truth known. No matter what it cost, justice would prevail. The night passed fitfully, filled with sirens and suspicious noises, but morning found the Johnson family unbowed, preparing to return to court. Their home was damaged, their safety threatened, but their spirit remained unbroken. Simone dressed carefully in her best suit, the only one not damaged in the vandalism. As she pinned on her grandfather's old NAACP pin, she made a silent promise. Today would be different. Today, the truth would finally come to light. The sun rose over their troubled neighborhood, painting the broken windows with golden light. In his downtown office, Richard Bancroft was probably already planning his next move, confident in his power to crush any opposition. But he had never faced anyone like Simone Johnson. Armed with truth, backed by her community's strength and, guided by her grandfather's wisdom, she was ready for whatever came next. The war for justice was far from over, but the tide was finally beginning to turn. Judge Patricia Williams looked nothing like Malcolm Kessler. Where he had been tall and intimidating, she was petite and unassuming. But as she studied the case, files before her, her dark eyes sharp and intelligent, Simone recognized something familiar, the same look of determination her grandfather had worn when facing difficult cases. "Let me be clear," Williams addressed the courtroom, her voice quiet but commanding. "The irregularities in this case are deeply troubling. We will proceed with absolute adherence to proper procedure. Is that understood?" Victoria Hale's usual confidence seemed diminished as she stood. "Yes, Your Honor, though given the advanced stage of proceedings, given the numerous procedural violations already documented," Williams cut her off. "We will review all previously admitted evidence. The jury will be instructed accordingly." Simone felt a surge of hope. Finally, a chance for fair consideration of their case. She'd spent the night organizing Peterson's documents, preparing for this moment. "Your Honor," she stood. "In light of recent developments, the defense requests permission to recall several witnesses for additional questioning." "Objection." Hale's voice held a note of panic. "The defense is attempting to reopen settled testimony." "Nothing about this case is settled, Ms. Hale." Judge Williams' tone was steel wrapped in silk. "Request granted, Miss Johnson. Proceed." Simone approached the podium, her grandfather's briefcase feeling lighter today. "The defense recalls James Morrison." The security guard looked significantly less confident as he retook the stand. Unlike his previous testimony, his uniform was slightly rumpled, his expression wary. "Mr. Morrison," Simone began, "you previously testified about security protocols at the warehouse. I'd like to revisit those procedures in light of new information." She placed a document on the projector. "This is the security log from September 15th, showing your checkpoint scans throughout the night. Could you explain why there's a 40-minute gap in your rounds precisely when the fire started?" Morrison's face paled. There must be some mistake." "No mistake, but I have another document that might explain it." She produced one of Peterson's memos. "This is an internal email instructing security personnel to avoid certain areas of the warehouse that night. Did you receive this instruction?" "Objection." Hale shot to her feet. "These documents were submitted to my office last night and reviewed for authenticity," Judge Williams finished. "Objection overruled. The witness will answer." Morrison looked desperately toward the prosecution table where Richard Bancroft sat whispering furiously to his legal team. I was told it was a system test." "A system test?" Simone nodded thoughtfully. "Like the system test that disabled the sprinklers in sections 3, 7, and 9, exactly where the fire started?" The gallery erupted in murmurs. Morrison's composure cracked entirely. "They said nobody would get hurt. It was just supposed to be a small fire for the insurance." "Objection," Hale practically shouted. "This witness is clearly confused." "The witness is clearly confessing," Judge Williams corrected. "Mr. Morrison, you are reminded that you are under oath. Continue, Miss Johnson." Simone pressed on, methodically exposing the carefully orchestrated plan. Morrison broke down completely, admitting to his role in the insurance fraud scheme. As he was led away by deputies, Simone called her next witness. The defense recalls Margaret Whitman. Bancroft's CFO approached the stand with visible reluctance. Her designer suit and perfect makeup couldn't hide her nervous tension. "Ms. Whitman," Simone began, "you previously testified about my family's financial records. I'd like to discuss how those records were obtained." She produced more of Peterson's documents. "These internal emails show systematic cyber attacks on my family's bank accounts initiated from Bancroft development servers. Were you aware of these attacks?" Whitman's hand shook as she reached for her water glass. I need to consult with counsel." "Your Honor," Victoria Hale stood. "I request." A brief recess. Denied. Judge Williams's voice was firm. "Answer the question, Ms. Whitman." "I was aware," Whitman whispered. "Mr. Bancroft ordered it personally." The admission hit like a thunderbolt. Bancroft himself stood, his face contorted with rage, but his lawyer pulled him back down. Simone continued building her case witness by witness. The carefully constructed fraud began to unravel. She presented evidence of falsified insurance policies, doctored security footage, and systematic harassment of her family and their supporters. The defense calls Michael Peterson. The former Bancroft employee walked to the stand, his face still showing bruises from the attack. But his voice was steady as he was sworn in. "Mr. Peterson," Simone began, "please tell the court about the insurance policies taken out on the warehouse." "Objection," Hale tried one last time. "This witness's credibility has been established through documented evidence," Judge Williams ruled. "Proceed, Mr. Peterson." Peterson detailed the elaborate fraud scheme, explaining how Bancroft had used shell companies to overinsure the warehouse. He presented records showing the building had been systematically stripped of valuable equipment before the fire. And, "Why target the Johnson family?" Simone asked. "Mr. Bancroft was explicit," Peterson testified. "He said they needed to be made an example of. Their refusal to sell was inspiring other homeowners to resist the development project. He said nobody says no to Richard Bancroft." As Peterson continued his testimony, Simone noticed Bancroft leaving his seat, whispering something to Victoria Hale before striding toward the exit. "Your Honor," Simone said quickly, "I request that Mr. Bancroft remain in the courtroom." "Mr. Bancroft," Judge Williams called out, "return to your seat or I'll have the deputies escort you back." Bancroft froze, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. As he returned to his seat, Simone pressed on with her questioning. "Mr. Peterson, did Mr. Bancroft personally approve the plan to frame my family?" "Yes. I have his signed authorization for every step. The cyber attacks, the falsified evidence, the witness intimidation. It's all documented." Victoria Hale's composure finally cracked. "Your Honor, I need to address the court. In light of recent revelations, I must withdraw, as counsel do. Two ethical concerns." "Sit down, Ms. Hale," Judge Williams ordered. "You'll have plenty of time to address the ethics board later. Continue, Miss Johnson." Simone methodically presented the rest of Peterson's evidence, building an ironclad case of fraud, corruption, and criminal conspiracy. The jury sat riveted as the full scope of Bancroft's scheme became clear. Finally, she turned to her last witness. The defense calls Richard Bancroft. A hush fell over the courtroom as Bancroft approached the stand. His expensive suit and commanding presence seemed diminished somehow, but arrogance still radiated from every pore. "Mr. Bancroft," Simone began, "let's discuss the real reason for this case. It was never about a warehouse fire, was it?" "I don't know what you mean," he replied coldly. Simone produced a map of Pine Grove. "This is your company's development plan for our neighborhood. The highlighted properties are ones that refuse to sell. Could you explain why those same properties have all faced criminal charges or regulatory harassment in the past year?" "Objection," Hale said weakly. "Relevance goes to motive," Judge Williams ruled. "Answer the question, Mr. Bancroft." "I don't micromanage every aspect of my business," Bancroft deflected. "If some properties face legal issues that your company manufactured," Simone interrupted. "Like the health code violations suddenly filed against every restaurant that wouldn't sell, Or the building code complaints against every homeowner who refused your offers? Bancroft's jaw clenched. You can't prove. I can prove all of it. Simone held up Peterson's files. Every email, every memo, every directive coming directly from your office, including this one, dated September 1st, where you explicitly ordered your team to make an example of my family. She pressed on, methodically, dismantling his denials. With each question, his arrogance cracked further, revealing the desperation beneath. You thought nobody would stand up to you, Simone continued. That money and power could buy anything, that you could destroy an entire community just to increase your profit margins. You don't understand business, Bancroft snapped. That neighborhood is wasted space. My development would bring progress, improvement. Improvement for who? The families you'd displace? The communities you'd destroy? Those people should thank me. I offered fair prices for their worthless properties. But no, they had to be difficult, had to stand in the way of progress. Sometimes people need to be taught. He stopped abruptly, realizing what he'd admitted. The courtroom was dead silent. Simone let his words hang in the air for a moment before asking quietly, Taught what, Mr. Bancroft? That nobody says no to you? That you can burn down buildings and frame innocent people if they don't bow to your wishes? Bancroft exploded. You think you're so clever, little girl, playing lawyer with your grandfather's hand-me-down briefcase. You have no idea what real power is. I own this city. A few documents won't change that. There will always be more judges, more lawyers, more ways to get what I want. Thank you, Mr. Bancroft, Simone said calmly. No further questions. Judge Williams's gavel cracked like thunder. Deputies, take Mr. Bancroft into custody. The jury is instructed to consider his outburst as part of their deliberations. As Bancroft was led away in handcuffs, still shouting threats, Simone returned to the defense table. Her parents sat there crying openly, while the gallery erupted in cheers and applause. Order, Williams commanded. Miss Johnson, are you prepared to make your closing argument? Simone stood, feeling the weight of the moment. She looked at the jury, 12 citizens who had watched justice unfold before their eyes. She thought of her grandfather, of all the battles he'd fought in this same courthouse. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, she began, her voice clear and strong. This case began as an accusation against my family. It ends as an exposure of corruption, greed, and the abuse of power. You've seen the evidence. You've heard Mr. Bancroft's own words. The choice before you isn't just about guilt or innocence. It's about whether justice applies to everyone, no matter how rich or powerful they may be, she continued, weaving together the threads of evidence, witness testimony, and revealed truth. As she spoke, she could feel her grandfather's presence, could almost hear his voice guiding her words. The prosecution claimed this case was about accountability, she concluded. They were right, but not in the way they intended. Today, you have the power to hold the truly guilty accountable, to show that in America, justice isn't for sale, that the law protects everyone, not just the wealthy and powerful, that the truth, no matter how long buried, will always come to light. As she sat down, the courtroom remained silent, absorbing her words. Judge Williams turned to the jury with final instructions, but Simone barely heard them. She felt drained but fulfilled, knowing she had done everything possible to secure justice. Her father squeezed her hand. Your grandfather would be so proud, he whispered. Sarah wiped tears from her eyes. He is proud, baby. I know he's watching right now. The jury filed out to begin deliberations. Victoria Hale sat alone at the prosecution table, her career likely over. The gallery buzzed with excitement, reporters already rushing to file their stories. Outside the courthouse, supporters gathered on the steps, holding signs and chanting for justice. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant colors, as if nature itself was celebrating the triumph of truth over power. Simone stood at the window watching the scene below. She thought of all the people who had helped make this moment possible. Mrs. Walker finding her courage, Michael Peterson risking everything for the truth, Ashley providing crucial information, and countless others who had refused to be silenced by fear. Most of all, she thought of her grandfather. He had faced similar battles, had stood in this same courthouse fighting for justice when the odds seemed insurmountable. His spirit had guided her every step of the way. The jury would return soon with their verdict, but in many ways, justice had already been served. The truth was out, Bancroft's crimes exposed, and a community's right to exist had been defended. Simone Johnson, 17 years old and armed with nothing but truth and determination, had done what no one thought possible. She had proven that sometimes the most powerful weapon against injustice is the courage to stand up and fight. As the sun set on this historic day, she knew that whatever the jury decided, something fundamental had changed. The power of wealth and corruption had met its match in the strength of justice and truth. The jury had been deliberating for 6 hours when the bailiff announced they had reached a verdict. As people filed back into the courtroom, Simone sat perfectly still at the defense table, her parents' hands clasped tightly in hers. The air felt electric with anticipation. Judge Williams studied the verdict form before addressing the packed gallery. "I remind everyone that outbursts will not be tolerated. Mr. Foreman, has the jury reached a unanimous verdict?" The foreman stood, a retired schoolteacher who had watched the entire trial with careful attention. "We have, Your Honor. In the matter of insurance fraud and conspiracy charges against Richard Bancroft and Bancroft Developments, how do you find?" "We find the defendant guilty on all counts." A collective gasp filled the courtroom. Bancroft, still in custody after his outburst, showed no reaction beyond a slight tightening of his jaw. "In the matter of criminal charges against the Johnson family, how do you find?" "Not guilty on all counts, Your Honor. Furthermore, the jury recommends a full investigation into the pattern of harassment and intimidation revealed during this trial." This time, the gallery's response couldn't be contained. Cheers erupted as Sarah burst into tears. Marcus wrapped his arms around both his wife and daughter, and supporters hugged each other in celebration. Judge Williams allowed the moment before restoring order. "Mr. Bancroft, please rise for sentencing." Richard Bancroft stood, his expensive suit wrinkled from hours in custody, his arrogance finally cracked. His new lawyer, hastily retained after Victoria Hale's withdrawal, looked equally defeated. "The crimes revealed in this trial go beyond simple fraud," Williams began, her voice carrying clear authority. "You orchestrated a systematic campaign of corruption, intimidation, and destruction aimed at an entire community. You attempted to destroy innocent lives for profit, abused the legal system, and showed complete contempt for justice itself." She paused, letting her words sink in. "I hereby sentence you to 15 years in federal prison, order full restitution to all affected parties, and permanently bar you from any real estate or development activities. Furthermore, I'm freezing all Bancroft development assets pending a complete federal investigation." As Bancroft was led away, still in handcuffs, Judge Williams turned to the Johnson family. "Miss Johnson, approach the bench." Simone stood on slightly shaky legs, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just happened. "Young lady," Williams said, her stern demeanor softening slightly. "In 30 years on the bench, I've rarely seen such a masterful presentation of justice. Your grandfather would be proud." "Thank you, Your Honor." Simone's voice wavered with emotion. "I'm recommending you for a full scholarship to any law school of your choice. The legal profession needs more advocates like you." Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed as the Johnson family emerged into bright sunlight. Their neighbors from Pine Grove had gathered on the steps, holding signs and cheering. Mrs. Walker pushed through the crowd to hug Simone, tears streaming down her face. "You did it, baby girl," she said. "You saved all of us." Michael Peterson stood at the edge of the crowd, his injuries still visible but his expression peaceful. "Thank you for making my sacrifice worth it," he told Simone. The truth finally came out. Reporters shouted questions. "Miss Johnson, how does it feel to win your first case? Will you be pursuing a legal career? What message do you have for other young people fighting injustice?" Simone stepped up to the microphones, her father's steady hand on her shoulder. This victory belongs to everyone who refused to be silenced by power and money. My grandfather taught me that justice doesn't belong to the wealthy or powerful. It belongs to anyone brave enough to fight for it. Back in Pine Grove, the celebration spilled into the streets. Neighbors who had been afraid to speak up now shared their stories of Bancroft's intimidation. Others brought out old photos remembering the community's history of resistance against those who would destroy it. Sarah organized an impromptu feast with everyone contributing dishes. The same people who had watched in fear as the Johnsons stood alone now gathered to celebrate their shared victory. Ashley, the courthouse clerk who had helped behind the scenes, joined them. "I was so scared of losing my job," she admitted to Simone, "but watching you stand up to them gave me courage." As evening fell, Simone slipped away from the celebration, walking to the small cemetery where her grandfather was buried. She placed her legal notes on his gravestone, along with the NAACP pin she'd worn throughout the trial. "We did it, Grandpa," she whispered. "Everything you taught me, everything you fought for, it made a difference." The sound of footsteps made her turn. Judge Patricia Williams stood there, having changed from her judicial robes into casual clothes. "I knew your grandfather," she said quietly. "He taught me my first lesson about justice, back when I was a young lawyer facing my own impossible case. Mind if I join you?" They sat together on a nearby bench as twilight painted the sky in purple and gold. Williams shared stories about William Johnson's early cases, the battles he'd fought, the lives he'd changed. "He never gave up," Williams recalled. "No matter how powerful the opposition, no matter how many threats he received, he believed justice was worth any price." "I used to think he was just teaching me about law," Simone said. "But it was more than that, wasn't it?" Williams nodded. "He was teaching you about courage, about standing up when everyone else sits down, about fighting for what's right, even when it seems impossible." Back at the house, the celebration continued. News crews had arrived to interview community members, capturing the story of a neighborhood that had fought back against corporate greed and won. Marcus found his daughter still sitting in the cemetery. "Your mother's looking for you," some big shot law firms called, wanting to talk about internships. Simone smiled. "I'll be there in a minute." After they left, she touched her grandfather's gravestone one last time. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." The next morning brought a flood of media coverage. Headlines proclaimed, "Teenage lawyer defeats billionaire developer," and "Justice prevails in historic case." Interviews with jurors revealed how Simone's methodical presentation of evidence had won them over. But the real impact was visible in Pine Grove itself. People walked taller, spoke more freely. The fear that had gripped the community for so long was lifting, replaced by a sense of empowerment. Tommy Walker, whose job had been threatened, received multiple offers from ethical companies. Other families who had been pressured to sell their homes now organized to protect their community's future. The U.S. Attorney's Office announced a broader investigation into corporate development practices, sparked by evidence revealed during the trial. Victoria Hale faced disbarment proceedings, while Judge Kessler's removal became permanent following the judicial review. Simone received letters from young people across the country, inspired by her example. Many shared their own stories of fighting against powerful interests, asking for advice and guidance. A week after the verdict, she attended a community meeting in the local church. The same space that had once hosted fearful discussions about Bancroft's threats now buzzed with plans for the future. "We're establishing a legal defense fund," Mrs. Walker announced, "to help other communities fight back against corporate bullying. We're calling it the William Johnson Memorial Fund." Simone watched as neighbors who had once been too frightened to speak to each other now worked together, planning community improvements and protective measures. The victory had given them more than justice. It had given them their voice back. Sarah found her daughter standing in her grandfather's study, running her fingers over his old law books. "What are you thinking about, baby?" "Everything that's changed," Simone replied. "A month ago, I was just a high school student who read law books for fun. Now you're a symbol of hope," Sarah finished, "just like your grandfather was." The doorbell rang, another reporter seeking an interview. But this time it was different. A young girl stood on their porch clutching a notebook. "I'm doing a school report on the trial," she explained shyly. "You made me realize we don't have to be afraid to stand up for what's right." Simone invited her in, remembering how she had once sat in this same study, listening to her grandfather's stories about justice and courage. As she shared her experience with the young student, Simone realized that this was her grandfather's greatest legacy, not just fighting for justice, but inspiring others to take up the fight. The aftermath of the trial continued to ripple outward. Other communities facing similar development pressures reached out for guidance. Law schools invited Simone to speak about the case. Civil rights organizations cited the verdict as a landmark victory for community rights. But for Simone, the most meaningful impact was visible in her own neighborhood. The once threatened community now thrived, its residents no longer living in fear of corporate retaliation. One evening, as she helped clean up after another community meeting, Mrs. Walker handed her an old photograph. It showed William Johnson standing on the courthouse steps after winning his first major case. "He had that same look you get," Mrs. Walker said. "That determination to fight for what's right no matter the cost." Simone studied the photo, recognizing the fire in her grandfather's eyes, the same fire that had driven her through the trial, that had given her courage when everything seemed hopeless. The next day, she began organizing her case notes and trial documents, preparing them for the state law library's archives. Future lawyers would study this case, learning how a 17-year-old girl stood up to corporate power and won. But more importantly, they would learn what her grandfather had taught her, that justice isn't just about laws and courtrooms. It's about courage, community, and the unwavering belief that truth will prevail if enough people stand up to defend it. As she boxed up the last of the documents, Simone found her grandfather's old notebook, filled with his handwritten observations about law and justice. On the final page, he had written words that now seemed prophetic. "The law is a tool, but justice is a flame. Pass it on, and it will light the way for others." Looking out over her neighborhood where children played freely and neighbors chatted without fear, Simone knew she had done more than win a case. She had kept that flame burning, lighting the way for a new generation of justice seekers. The sun set on Pine Grove, painting the sky in brilliant colors. In his downtown cell, Richard Bancroft awaited transfer to federal prison. In law offices across the country, corporate lawyers reviewed development practices with new caution. And in countless communities, people began to stand up, inspired by the story of a teenage girl who proved that justice was stronger than money and power. Simone Johnson, 17 years old and newly awakened to her purpose, smiled as she watched her community embrace its hard-won freedom. Her grandfather's legacy lived on, not just in the victory they'd achieved, but in the courage they'd inspired in others. The flame of justice burned brighter than ever, ready to light the way forward. Early morning mist blanketed Pine Grove Cemetery as Simone knelt before her grandfather's gravestone, carefully arranging her collection of trial documents. The morning dew dampened her dress, but she barely noticed. 6 months had passed since the verdict, and today felt like the right time to share everything with him. "I brought you something, Grandpa," she said softly, placing her worn briefcase, his old briefcase, beside the stone. "Every note, every motion, every piece of evidence. I thought you should have them." She ran her fingers over his name, William Johnson, S.K., champion of justice. Below it, someone had recently added fresh flowers and a newspaper clipping about the trial's impact on corporate development practices nationwide. "The federal investigation is still ongoing," she continued, organizing the papers. "They've uncovered similar schemes in 3 other cities. More whistleblowers coming forward every week. Turns out we weren't the only ones Bancroft tried to destroy." A gentle breeze stirred the papers, and Simone smiled, remembering how her grandfather used to say that wind through papers was justice whispering its secrets. She pulled out the final appeal denial for Bancroft, 15 years with no possibility of early release. "Victoria Hale was disbarred yesterday," she added. "The ethics board said her conduct during the trial was a profound betrayal of legal principles. She's cooperating with prosecutors now, trading information for leniency. Judge Kessler retired rather than face investigation, But the Judicial Review Board is still examining every case he handled. Sarah's voice called from the cemetery entrance. Baby, we need to head to the community center soon. Coming, Mama. Simone arranged the last of the documents, securing them in a waterproof container she'd had specially made. The William Johnson Memorial Fund is officially launching today, she told the gravestone. Already raised enough to help 3 other communities fight predatory development. Mrs. Walker says it's just the beginning. She stood, brushing grass from her knees. The morning sun was burning away the mist, revealing a changed pine grove beyond the cemetery walls. Where fear and silence had once ruled, the neighborhood now buzzed with life and purpose. The community center was packed when they arrived. Formerly empty storefronts had been converted into legal aid offices, community meeting spaces, and education centers. Michael Peterson, fully recovered from his injuries, ran the whistleblower support program. There's our star, Mrs. Walker called out, waving from her seat in the front row. Her son Tommy sat beside her, proudly wearing his new employee badge from an ethical development firm that had recruited him after the trial. Marcus Johnson stood at the podium, looking distinguished in his suit as he called the meeting to order. 6 months ago, we were a community under siege. Today, we're a model for neighborhood empowerment across the country. The crowd cheered as he continued. The William Johnson Memorial Fund has already provided legal support to communities in Atlanta, Detroit, and Philadelphia. Corporate developers are thinking twice before trying to bulldoze neighborhoods like ours. Simone watched from the wings as her father introduced speakers, community leaders, legal experts, and families who had stood strong against intimidation. The fear that had once permeated these gatherings was gone, replaced by determination and hope. Ashley, the courthouse clerk who had risked her job to help expose the truth, now coordinated the fund's legal documentation program. We're teaching other communities how to protect themselves, she told the audience. How to document threats, preserve evidence, and build cases against corporate bullies. The presentations continued throughout the morning. A law professor discussed the trial's impact on legal education. The Johnson case is now required reading in ethics courses nationwide. It's changing how we teach about corporate accountability and community rights. Mrs. Walker spoke about the neighborhood's transformation. We're not just saving our homes, we're building something stronger. Every child in Pine Grove now knows they can stand up to injustice and win. Finally, it was Simone's turn to speak. As she approached the podium, she saw familiar faces in the crowd, jurors from the trial, reporters who had covered the case, even Judge Williams, sitting quietly in the back. 6 months ago, I stood in a courtroom with nothing but my grandfather's old briefcase and a determination to find justice, she began. Today, I stand here with something far more powerful, a community that refused to be broken. She shared stories of other neighborhoods reaching out, of young people inspired to pursue legal careers, of corporate lawyers quietly passing information about other fraudulent schemes. My grandfather taught me that justice isn't just about laws, it's about courage, community, and never giving up. What we achieved wasn't just a legal victory. It was proof that when we stand together, even the most powerful forces can't destroy us. The applause was interrupted by a commotion at the back of the room. A group of residents from a nearby city had arrived, seeking help with their own battle against corporate development. They're trying to force us out, their spokesperson explained. Same tactics, false charges, regulatory harassment, everything Bancroft did here. Simone exchanged glances with her parents, seeing the same determination in their eyes. The fight wasn't over. It was spreading, growing stronger with each community that found its voice. Later that afternoon, Simone sat in her grandfather's study, surrounded by acceptance letters from top law schools, full scholarships just as Judge Williams had promised. But it wasn't the prestige that drew her attention. It was the opportunity to learn more, to help more people. Sarah found her there, comparing course offerings and clinical programs. Your grandfather used to sit exactly like that, planning his cases, she said softly. I miss him, Mama. I wish he could have seen it all. Oh, baby. Sarah wrapped her arms around her daughter. He saw every minute of it. Through you. A knock at the door interrupted them. It was Mrs. Walker, accompanied by the visitors from the morning's meeting. "Sorry to disturb you," she said, "but these folks need some guidance." Made me think of how William used to help people right here in this study. Simone cleared space on the desk, pulling out fresh legal pads. "Tell me everything," she said, just as her grandfather had done countless times in this same room. As the sun set over Pine Grove, cars lined the street outside the Johnson house, community members bringing food, offering support, ready to help another neighborhood fight back. The scene would have been familiar to William Johnson, who had hosted similar gatherings decades ago. In the study, Simone worked late into the night, documenting the new case. Her father brought coffee just, as he had during the trial. Her mother organized the neighbors into research teams, copying her daughter's methodical approach to evidence gathering. The next morning, Simone visited the cemetery again, this time with fresh purpose. "Another case, Grandpa," she told the gravestone. "Another chance to fight for justice." She traced his name on the stone, feeling the deep connection between past and future. Her grandfather had blazed a trail decades ago, fighting battles that seemed impossible. Now she would continue that legacy, helping others find the courage to stand up for their rights. The William Johnson Memorial Fund grew rapidly, supporting legal challenges across the country. Bancroft's former empire crumbled as federal investigations exposed decades of corruption. Other corporate developers faced increased scrutiny and resistance from empowered communities. Simone's story inspired a new generation of activists and lawyers. High school students started legal aid clubs, learning how to protect their communities. Law schools revamped their ethics curricula, emphasizing corporate accountability and community rights. 1 year after the verdict, Pine Grove hosted a national conference on community empowerment. Neighborhoods facing similar battles sent representatives to learn from their experience. The small community that had nearly been destroyed by corporate greed now led a growing movement for justice. In her grandfather's study, Simone added new law books beside his old ones, building on his legacy while creating her own. The worn briefcase sat in a place of honor, a symbol of battles fought and won. Mrs. Walker's granddaughter, inspired by the trial, joined Simone's pre-law study group. Other young people in the community began showing interest in legal careers, seeing how the law could be a tool for positive change. The media attention eventually faded, but Pine Grove's transformation continued. The William Johnson Memorial Fund expanded its mission, offering educational programs and community organizing support alongside legal aid. Michael Peterson's whistleblower program became a national model, helping others find the courage to expose corporate corruption. Ashley's documentation system was adopted by legal aid organizations across the country. Judge Williams became a mentor to Simone, sharing her own experiences fighting for justice. Their regular conversations in the cemetery became a tradition, bridging generations of legal advocacy. One evening, as Simone prepared to leave for law school, she made one final visit to her grandfather's grave. The container of trial documents had weathered the seasons, a permanent testament to their victory. "I'm ready, Grandpa," she said softly. "Ready to keep fighting, just like you did. The briefcase is coming with me. Still plenty of battles left to win." As she turned to leave, the setting sun cast long shadows across the cemetery. In those shadows, she could almost see her grandfather nodding in approval, his spirit living on in every life touched by their victory. Pine Grove would never be the same. The community that had faced destruction now stood as a beacon of hope, proving that justice was possible when people found the courage to stand together. Simone Johnson, no longer just a teenage girl with a borrowed briefcase, had become part of something larger than herself. She had kept her grandfather's flame burning, lighting the way for others to follow. The law books in the study would soon have new companions in her dorm room. The briefcase would hold new cases, new battles for justice. But the lesson learned in that historic trial would remain forever true. When courage meets justice, no power on earth can stop the truth from prevailing. As night fell over Pine Grove, Lights burned in windows throughout the neighborhood. In homes that had once faced destruction, families planned for the future. In the community center that had once hosted fearful meetings, new generations learned about their rights. And in countless other communities across the country, people stood up against intimidation and greed, inspired by the story of a 17-year-old girl who proved that justice was stronger than money and power. The legacy of William Johnson lived on, not just in his granddaughter's victory, but in every life touched by their fight for justice. The flame had been passed, and it would continue to light the way forward, one battle at a time.